Righto, got me a little Buzzbox Hijet. You haven't seen these things before. They're pretty cool. Bought one as a work truck. They're all imported from Japan, and in Japan there's lots of accessories for these things. Not much over in Australia, but you can get them sent over here. And I bought this kit from a place in Melbourne, Davey Automotive. They're basically bringing a few of these things over and selling them, and they had this kit in Australia already. You can get it from overseas, but I wanted to buy somewhere locally, and this is what I'm fitting to it. So this part here drops the front suspension down 40mm, and then you have a 40mm lift at the back. So these go between the spring and the diff, these go between the strut and the front knuckle, and then these space down the rear shockies because you're obviously adding length here. You want to add a little bit of length to your rear shocks. And then these, I think, are brake line spaces. I've got to look at that. And I bought these from another local supplier. They are your camber adjustment bolts. So I'll actually replace the top bolt where the knuckle goes in with one of these. And you can see that cam on there, that gives you an adjustment for your camber. So these have been used for years. I haven't ever had a problem with them, and at least they get an adjustment out of it. So as I'm doing this job, I'll do some videos and show you how all this stuff goes in. Alrighty, pull the wheel off. It's on stands, be safe. Next job is to undo these 4 bolts on top of here. Helps when you get a fully charged battery, and I'll start again. I've got 2 lights. Now, I've undone them already. Now what I want to do though is put a jack under this so it doesn't completely fall down. Probably a good thing to start with. Put a jack under it, that way it can't completely fall down. I don't think it will anyway because the shock absorber's still attached, but I'm going to put a jack under it. Alright, jack's under the diff there, away from where I'm working because these U-bolts have to come out. Let's rip these out. Nut. Now, they come out, and I went under that shock absorber right now so it has a bit more flex to move down. So, and that's not a 14, it's probably a 17. Push that off, if it'll let me. That's off. Now if I let the diff down, the jack down, there it goes. It's probably going to be held up by the other side. We'll see how much we get out of it. Not a lot, it's all hanging on here. I'm going to get these spaces in here, so I might have to loosen the other side off. We'll take the other shock absorber off first, so I'll do that now. So I loosened off the other spring on the other side, just the 4 bolts. They're all in there still, but I just loosened them. And then I've taken the other shock absorber off, and that's gave me plenty of clearance here. I've actually jacked it back up again. This piece goes in, and you want it to make sure that that hole there lines up on this pin here, and then there's an Allen key on the bottom of these. I've tightened that because it was loose when I got it, and that locates in the bottom there. So it just sits in there like that. I've got to locate that top pin and then put the U-bolts back through again. Now, something I've noticed here, I'm trying to get this back, which I could probably force it, but I don't want to. This is a bit tight, so I've undone that bolt there for this clamp. Another one up here on the chassis. I'm going to do that, and that'll give this cable a bit more free play to play around with. Now, what I've done here is, because the other side's still higher than this side, so it's a little bit of a fight to get this side started, but the bottom pin's located. It's still a bit crooked here, but the top pin's located. I've left these bolts loose, but I've taken out the free play. And the other thing to look at is these have like an edge they sit on. So just be careful of that, because you can have the spring, the U-bolt on the wrong side of that. So make sure your U-bolts are inboard on those two like guidelines. And then I'm going to do the other side now. I'm just going to leave this finger tight, and when I drop the other side down, this will all straighten up. And then once the other side's got the block in, then I'll tighten the other side up when I'm done. I'll come back over here and finish this side off, and that'll make everything nice and square. Alright, so I've done the other side. Now the other thing I'd say to be careful of, I've undone these to make it a bit easier. Just be careful that ABS line's not pulled tight, not the ABS sensor wire's not pulled tight, because you don't want to damage that. So I just got to tighten this side up now, and you want to do these up sort of evenly. Just make sure that's all coming back together where it should. The other side went up nice and square, so you could use an air tool or a electric ratchet on here, but I prefer to use my hand tools when I'm retightening stuff like this, so I don't bugger things up and I can watch what's going on. Most mistakes are made when people use air tools or electric rattle guns and not paying attention to what's going on. Sorry for the amateur footage here, I'm just using my phone for this whole video because I just want to get this job done. Being my own car, I don't get a lot of time to play, so I'll come back when I'm tight. Alrighty, they're tightened up. Now, the other thing I'd say, when you're tightening U-bolts, try and do it evenly. So make sure your threads are roughly the same length coming back out. If this one's really short and that one's really long, you're basically twisting that U-bolt around. That's no good. You see that? That's how you fit those spacer blocks. So the next thing I've got to do is put those shock absorber spacers in. Now, this isn't the greatest idea in the world, but I see why they've done it this way. So you don't have to replace the rear shock. I'm going to eventually replace them. I'm just put these in temporary so that this thing works. I reckon you probably get away without doing it, but I'm on, you know, the spring's sagging now, there's no jack under it, and that would probably still line up. But they give you these to space the shock absorber. Otherwise they top out. Now, how it works is there's a sleeve that goes into the shock absorber hole. We'll have to push that in. I might even put a bit of lube on it. Right, and then this piece will go over like that. You put your bolt back through and tighten that up, and then this hole here goes where the original bolt shock was on that pin, which is on there. And I'd say you leave your washers on there, I think, but I'm going to leave the washers on there that were on there, so that way I don't lose them. And then you bolt that all together. So that's what that's supposed to look like, from what I can tell. So use the original nuts and washers in that bottom part, and then use a new bolt, and you tighten it up until it doesn't turn anymore, because those two legs, they bend their way in and they bottom out on that sleeve that I put in between the rubber mounts. Something I did a while ago on this thing is I fitted a little LED strip along the bottom here, just for giggles. It's one of those underglow kits. It's really good when you're working at night time. Anyway, I'm going to fit the other one to the other side. It's getting dark now, so I'm going to do the front tomorrow. And there you go, back end's done. Alrighty, we're on the front now. Pulled that bolt out. That's for the ABS wire here. If you give these a gentle little wriggle, they normally come out pretty easily. Be gentle not to break that. Undo the bolt back here for the brake line, and I've got to do these two. So one goes that side. You can see it's square on the back top here around the sides. This side's rounded, same as that side. Square, spaces go in the middle. Now, rule number one when you're a mechanic is you don't tighten nothing until all your bolts are in. So just keep that in mind whenever you're working on cars. That's a little trick for you, is never tighten any of this stuff until you got everything in place. Because you always get to the last bolt, it won't go in. I'll keep going. Alrighty, so what we've got now is both these top spaces in there. I've tightened up the top two. Bottom's still loose. Now, this bolt here I've replaced with that camber adjustment bolt. So what happens now is, as I turn this, you can watch that change direction. See it closer here. As I wind that bolt around, it gives you a little bit of a camber adjustment. I probably recommend doing that on this, because once you lift the car, that's going to be out slightly. And when you want to set it, you want to set it so the wheel's leaning in towards the car. Something else I noticed too is when you drop the arm out the bottom of this car, like when it's dropped down, you'll feel it won't feel like it wants to go back in. Just turn the drive shaft a little bit so the ball bearings and the CV go back in. The last thing I want to do on here, once I've got this tightened up, is fit that bracket, which I'll do in a second. And once I've got it back on the ground, I'm going to undo that bolt there and then retighten it. And that way that bush here is repositioned so it's not bound up, because if you don't do that, you're twisting that bush slightly. And that's something you should do when you're doing any lift kits, is make sure nothing's binding up. Anyway, I'll get going and I'll fit that bracket, and then I'll get a wheel alignment done, and they can now adjust that to a degree. If you wanted to, you could possibly put one in the top here, but I'm not sure if it would move too far because of the square notches here. I don't think you'd get much out of it, but you know, this one here's enough. That should be all you need. So there's my little brake line extending bracket. The main thing is make sure your hoses still aren't pulled tight. That one's a little bit tight there still, so I've bent this forward a little bit. Give a little bit more. There we go. That feels better. So as long as there's still a bit of movement there, I mean, this all moves together, so this doesn't really matter here anyway, because it's going to move with the strut. So where's my hand? So from this point here is all turning together. This is where it's flexible. So as long as you've got that roughly there, you should be right. And then I've noticed that this is too short now for the ABS line. So I'm going to have to undo this clip here, and I might make something up myself that will drop that down lower, because you don't want that breaking at all, and you still want to secure it somehow. So I'll figure something out and I'll come back to you on that one. Just another hint and tip I just noticed on this thing. There's all the things you find out about these little kits that you don't really know about until you start fitting them. Now, because the orientation of the shock or the strut has moved backwards, so it's moved towards the car, it gets close to the body up here, and I noticed that this brake line was actually touching on the side of the shock absorber or strut here. So I've just gently bent that brake line back out the way a little bit. So make sure when you're doing this sort of work, if you're doing it yourself, check things like that. This ABS line's a bit of a pain because it doesn't quite reach, so I'm going to have to work out how I'm going to get it to that hole and keep it away from everything still. So I might be running it a different direction around the front here or something. I've got to figure something out there yet, because running it around the back there, it was getting too tight and it didn't reach. But yeah, always check for things like that. You can see up here it's still really close to here. I'm going to check this once it's on the ground again to see if that changes anything. If it's anything I don't like about this kit so far is it shifts that strut inwards, which isn't ideal. So anyway, my plan eventually is to put coilovers in it, and that won't matter because then I'll remove this whole plate and I won't be using that at all. But I wanted to see how good these were because it's the first time I've fitted this kit, and I wanted to see exactly how well they fitted, and it is what it is. They're a modified part. It's not perfect, but if you're trying to get a bit of lift out of it, it's a cheap way of doing it. But just make sure things aren't rubbing and touching, and you know, everything looks right before you go and drive it around, because if you cut through that brake line, you're in a world of problems. Alright, so what I did here is I flipped this bracket around the other way, because it used to come around the back and it used to clip into here, and then it would come down to the hole. So I've flipped this upside down, I've bent it out slightly, I've run the ABS wiring through the front here and down, and I've just cable tied it to here, which I think will be far enough out the way from everything. There's still plenty of movement here, and this part doesn't really matter because it moves with everything else. So this should be fine. You just have to be careful when you're doing a wheel alignment, you don't pinch that with your spanner or anything. But that should be far enough out the way from the wheel so it won't touch any of that. So now what I want to do is I want to put the wheel on this side, just check that side of it, and I'm also going to turn the steering lock to lock and just make sure everything looks right, make sure nothing at the back here is going to hit. And the other thing I want to check is, I'll have to check is that I'll get a wheel alignment done, because if you raise a car up like this, you're also changing your toe angles. So your toe's going to be further in now because you've shortened the length of that tie rod end. So anyway, that's another story. I'll keep going. Alright, something else I noticed, which I didn't like. Okay, so when this strut's moved back, because this thing pushes it that way further towards the car, the original bracket for this brake line extender, once you pull it full lock, this line's very tight and I didn't like it. So what I've done is I've shifted it to where the ABS wiring used to clip in. I've just used a smaller bolt and then ran it underneath the strut there. Still plenty of clearance from the drive shaft, and I've got movement there. I'm both lock to lock. I can move that hose nicely. At the back here, things were pulling tight. It wasn't very nice. I didn't like it, so I've shifted it to here, which is a better position, I think. And then, yeah, same as the other side. ABS is just zip tied at the way. I've turned it lock to lock. I've got clearance here. The ABS wire does get really close to that spring, but I think it's going to be fine because it's just a bit of plastic touching it. And I think I'm happy with that. I'll put the wheels back on and go from there. Now I have loosened this bolt. I've got to loosen the other one yet. And once the car's back on the ground, I'll just climb under there and retighten them. And make sure your drive shafts turn freely as well before you put it all back together, in case you've got a CV binding up